What if everything you've been told about who you are is wrong? Not slightly wrong, not a little off, completely, fundamentally wrong. What if the version of reality you were handed as a child by your parents, your schools, your institutions was never meant to set you free? What if it was designed to keep you small? What if the story you have been living inside of, the story of who you are, what you are capable of, what is possible for a human being, was written not to liberate you, but to contain you? Stay with me, because what I am about to share with you has been hidden, suppressed, and deliberately kept from the masses for thousands of years. Not because it is dangerous to know, but because it is dangerous to the systems that depend on you not knowing it. And once you hear it, you cannot unhear it. So take a breath, settle in, and let yourself receive what is coming. In the next 40 minutes, we are going to go deep. Deeper than most conversations about spirituality ever go. We are going to explore what ancient civilizations actually knew about consciousness. Knowledge that predates modern science by thousands of years. Knowledge that was refined over centuries by the greatest minds and the most dedicated practitioners that humanity has ever produced. We are going to talk about what you really are. Beyond your body, beyond your thoughts, beyond your emotions, beyond even your mind. We're going to look at why this information was hidden, who hid it, and what they were afraid would happen if ordinary people discovered it. We are going to trace this knowledge through the Egyptian mystery schools, the Vedic traditions of ancient India, the Hermetic teachings of the classical world, the Gnostic communities of early Christianity, and the Kabbalistic traditions that have preserved this wisdom through centuries of persecution. And at the end of this journey, I am going to leave you with something practical, something you can use tonight, something that, if you actually do it, will begin to shift the way you experience reality, not gradually, not eventually, but immediately. If you have ever felt like there is something more, something just beyond the edge of what you can see, what you can explain, what ordinary life seems to offer, then this was made for you. If you have ever had the feeling that the world as it is presented to you is somehow incomplete, that there are layers beneath the surface that most people never look at, that the story you were told about what a human being is and what reality is doesn't quite add up, then you already know, on some level, what we are about to explore together. Let's begin. From the moment you were born, a story was being written for you. A story about who you are, what you are capable of, what reality is, what is possible and what is not, what is real and what is fantasy, what is sacred and what is ordinary. You were given a name. That name became your identity. You were given a nationality, and that nationality became part of how you understood yourself in relation to others. You were given a religion, or the absence of one, a social class, a set of beliefs, assumptions, and unconscious certainties about the nature of existence. And here is what almost no one ever tells you. None of that is you. That is the costume, the character, the role you were handed to play in this particular lifetime, in this particular body, in this particular corner of history. It is a magnificent costume, elaborate and convincing, so convincing that most human beings spend their entire lives identified completely with it, never once questioning whether there might be something wearing the costume that is not the costume itself, But underneath that costume, underneath the labels, the memories, the personality, the preferences, the fears, the ambitions, the story of your personal history, there is something else, something ancient, something vast, something that was never born when your body was born, and that will not end when your body ends. Every major wisdom tradition in human history has pointed at this something. They have given it different names, described it in different language, approached it through different practices and different cosmologies, but they are all pointing at the same thing. The ancient Egyptians called it the Ba and the Ka, the soul and the spirit, two aspects of an eternal being, temporarily experiencing a human life. They built entire civilizations, entire cosmologies, entire systems of philosophy and practice around the understanding that the human being is not primarily a physical creature, that the physical body is the outermost expression of something far more vast and far more enduring. The Vedic sages of ancient India called it Atman, the true self, and they described it as identical in nature to Brahman, the infinite self-aware consciousness from which all things arise and into which all things return, not similar to it, not connected to it. Identical, the same substance, the same awareness, temporarily appearing to be individual, temporarily appearing to be separate. The way a wave temporarily appears to be separate from the ocean it is made of. The Gnostics of early Christianity called it the divine spark, a fragment of pure light, a piece of the original fullness of the divine that had somehow found itself trapped inside matter, waiting, longing, remembering in its deepest layers what it actually was. The Hermetic tradition, which synthesized the wisdom of Egypt and Greece and produced some of the most sophisticated metaphysical writing in human history, described the human being as a microcosm, a miniature universe containing within itself the same structure, the same laws, the same creative intelligence as the cosmos as a whole, as above, so below, as within, so without, as the universe, so the soul. Different cultures, different centuries, different languages, different cosmological frameworks, but the same recognition, the same pointing at the same undeniable, unmistakable reality. You are not a human being having a spiritual experience. You are a spiritual being having a human experience. And that distinction, that single, seemingly simple distinction, changes everything. It changes the way you understand suffering. It changes the way you understand death. It changes the way you understand your relationships, your purpose, your potential, your deepest nature. It changes everything. But if this is true, if this is what every major wisdom tradition, every genuine mystic, every initiated teacher in human history has been pointing at, then why don't we know it? Why does it feel so foreign, so strange, so difficult to believe? Why is this not the first thing we are taught as children? Because something was built to make sure you forgot. Let's talk about something called the consensus trance. This is a term used by transpersonal psychologists to describe the shared hypnotic state that most human beings live in. A kind of collective sleep, so deep and so consistent that those inside it never question whether they are dreaming. In ordinary hypnosis, a hypnotist induces a trance state in a subject, and within that trance, the subject accepts suggestions as reality. If the hypnotist says the room is cold, the subject feels cold. If the hypnotist says there is a beautiful flower on the table, the subject sees a flower that is not there. The consensus trance operates on the same principle, but it is not induced by a single hypnotist. It is induced by the entire structure of ordinary life, by the language you were taught to think in, by the categories you were given to organize experience, by the values and assumptions and certainties that were transmitted to you before you were old enough to evaluate them. From the time you were old enough to absorb information, you were immersed in a system designed to produce a certain kind of human being, one who works within the existing structures, one who consumes products and services to meet needs that the system has itself created, one who obeys the rules and norms of the society into which they were born, one who measures their own worth by standards they did not choose and cannot ultimately meet, one who never looks too deeply inward, because what lies inward, what is waiting there in the depths of consciousness, beneath the noise of the conditioned mind, is something that cannot be bought, cannot be sold, cannot be taxed, cannot be controlled, and cannot be taken away. The education system never taught you how to access the deeper layers of your own mind. It taught you facts, skills, and the ability to function within existing economic and social structures. But it never taught you to meditate. It never taught you to observe your own thoughts without identifying with them. It never taught you that consciousness itself is something that can be investigated, explored, and ultimately recognized as the ground of all experience. The media never showed you what consciousness really is. It showed you an endless stream of information, entertainment, and anxiety, carefully calibrated to keep your attention on the surface of things, on events, opinions, crises, and conflicts, never on the silent depth beneath all of it. Even most religious institutions, which were originally designed to point toward transcendence, toward the direct experience of the divine, became, over centuries, systems of control. They replaced direct experience with belief. They replaced gnosis with dogma. They replaced the living transmission of inner knowledge with the dead letter of scripture, ritual, and institutional authority. Gnosis, that is a word worth understanding deeply. It comes from the ancient Greek, and it means direct knowledge, not faith, not belief, not the second-hand transmission of someone else's experience. Direct, personal, immediate, experiential knowledge of reality. The kind of knowledge that arises not from reading about something, but from encountering it directly. The kind of knowing that is more like recognition than acquisition. The kind of certainty that does not require external validation, because it arises from the nature of experience itself. The Gnostic teachers of early Christianity, whose texts were suppressed and whose communities were persecuted into extinction by the emerging institutional church, understood something that the institution could not afford to allow to become widely known. You do not need a priest, a church, an institution, or any external intermediary to touch the divine. The divine is not elsewhere. It is not in a building, a book, a sacrament, or a clergy. It is here. It is now. It is what you actually are, at the deepest level of your being. You are already in contact with it. You have always been in contact with it. The architecture of forgetting, the consensus trance, the education system, the media, the institutional religions, was built precisely to make you doubt this, to make you feel that the sacred is somewhere other than where you are, that you are fundamentally unworthy of direct contact with the divine, that you need to go through external authorities to access what is, in truth, your own deepest nature, to make you feel small, separate, cut off. But here is what they could never fully suppress. The truth always finds a way back. It finds its way back through the mystics and the poets and the dreamers, through the near-death experiencers and the deep meditators, through the moments of profound beauty and inexplicable grace that break through the surface of ordinary life and remind us for a moment of what we actually are. And it finds its way back through consciousness itself. Because consciousness is not something that can be permanently enclosed. It is the very medium in which all of this is happening. Modern science has a profound problem. It is called the hard problem of consciousness. The hard problem was first named and articulated by philosopher David Chalmers in 1995, and in the 3 decades since, it has not been solved, not even approached, not even adequately addressed. The hard problem is this: why is there subjective experience at all? We can explain to a remarkable degree of precision how the brain processes information. We can map the neural pathways that respond to light, sound, touch and smell. We can measure the electrical signals that pass between neurons. We can identify the regions of the brain associated with different types of experience, with vision, with language, with memory, with emotion. But none of this explains why any of it feels like anything. Why does red look red? Why does music sound beautiful? Why does grief feel the way grief feels? Why is there an inner world at all? Science has no answer to this question. The most honest and rigorous scientists in the world will tell you directly, this is the greatest mystery we face. We do not know how physical processes give rise to subjective experience. We do not even have a convincing framework for how they could. But the ancient teachers were not confused about this at all, because they did not approach consciousness as something that the brain produces. They approached consciousness as the source from which the brain and everything else arises. In the Hermetic tradition, one of the oldest and most sophisticated wisdom traditions on earth, drawing on Egyptian, Greek and Persian sources and preserving a lineage of inner knowledge that stretches back thousands of years, there is a fundamental principle that states the all is mind, the universe is mental. This means that consciousness is not an epiphenomenon, not a byproduct, not a side effect, not something that emerges from matter once matter has become sufficiently complex. Consciousness is the fundamental substrate of reality. It is not in the universe. The universe is in it. Everything that exists, every particle, every wave, every galaxy, every thought, every moment of experience arises within consciousness, is made of consciousness, is a modulation, a pattern, an expression of the one infinite awareness that underlies all things. Think of it this way: you have had dreams. In those dreams, there were people, there were places, there were events, conversations, emotions, physical sensations, an entire world as vivid and real as waking life, sometimes more so. Where did that world exist? not outside you, not in physical space. It existed inside your mind. Your mind generated the entire experience. The light, the gravity, the other characters, the plot, the feelings, entirely from within itself. Now sit with this question. What if waking life operates on the same principle? What if this reality, this apparently solid, apparently external, apparently independent physical world is also appearing within a field of consciousness? Not your personal consciousness, not the individual awareness that you carry around with you and that goes to sleep when you go to sleep, but a vast, universal, infinite, self-aware consciousness. The consciousness that the Hermetic tradition called the All. The consciousness that the Vedic tradition called Brahman. The consciousness that the Gnostics called the Pleroma. The fullness, the original wholeness from which all things come. And what if you, the real you, the awareness that is receiving these words right now, are a localized expression of that infinite consciousness, not separate from it, not a fragment cut off in the dark, but a wave in an infinite ocean, temporarily taking form, temporarily appearing individual, exploring itself through the particular unrepeatable experience of being you. This is not a metaphor. This is not poetry. This is not a comforting story told to make death less frightening. This is what the most rigorous, most dedicated, most clear-eyed investigators of inner reality, the mystics, the sages, the initiated teachers of every tradition, in every culture, across every century, have directly, consistently, repeatedly reported. This is what they were pointing at, and it has radical implications for everything. Let's go deeper now, because understanding that you are consciousness is just the beginning. It is the doorway, not the destination. The ancient traditions did not simply say you are consciousness and leave it there. They went further. They mapped the territory. They described in extraordinary detail the architecture of what a human being actually is. The Vedic tradition describes 5 koshas, 5 sheaths or bodies that surround and interpenetrate each other like the layers of an onion, each one subtler and more expansive than the last. The outermost layer is the Annamaya kosha, the food body, the physical body. This is the body you see in the mirror, the body that eats, sleeps, ages, and eventually returns to the earth. The second layer is the Pranamaya kosha, the energy body, the body made of prana, of life force. This is the field of vital energy that animates the physical body, that flows through the channels the Vedic system calls nadis. The third layer is the Manomaya kosha, the mental body. This is the layer of thoughts, emotions, memories, and mental processes. Most people in the modern world are almost entirely identified with this layer. The fourth layer is the Vijnanamaya kosha, the wisdom body, the body of direct knowing. This is the layer of intuition and deep understanding that does not come from reasoning, but from direct perception. And the fifth layer, the innermost, the most expansive, is the Anandamaya kosha, the bliss body, the layer of consciousness closest to pure awareness itself, the place where the individual self begins to dissolve into something larger. Most people live their entire lives aware only of the outermost layers. They never discover that beneath the surface of ordinary experience, there are dimensions of their own being that they have never explored. The Egyptians described this same reality in their own language. They spoke of the Kut, the physical body, the Ka, the etheric double, the Ba, the soul, the Ak, the immortal divine self, and the Sahu, the spiritual body through which the fully realized self operates beyond physical existence. Different languages, the same map. And the map describes a human being who is far more than they have been told they are. Now let's ask the uncomfortable question. If this knowledge is so ancient, so consistent, so universally present across every major civilization and tradition, why don't we know it? Why isn't this the first thing we're taught as children? Why has so much effort been put into suppressing, destroying, and discrediting this knowledge? The answer is not comfortable, but it is important. A human being who truly knows what they are, who has moved beyond intellectual understanding into direct, lived recognition of their own nature, is not easily controlled. They do not live in chronic fear, because what they are cannot be threatened. They do not need to be told their value by an employer, a partner, or a culture, because they have touched something within themselves that is inherently unconditionally valuable. They do not need external approval to feel worthy, because worthiness in the deepest sense is recognized as intrinsic, not earned, not granted, not conditional on behavior or achievement. They do not consume compulsively to fill an inner void, because they have discovered directly and unmistakably that there is no void, that the sense of emptiness and incompleteness that drives so much of human behavior is itself a product of misidentification, of taking the costume for the self. A human being who knows what they truly are is, in the most fundamental sense, free. And a free human being does not fit neatly into systems designed for compliant ones. Throughout history, those who carried this knowledge, who taught it, who embodied it, who transmitted it, were systematically persecuted. The Gnostic schools of early Christianity were declared heretical by the institutionalizing church in the 2nd and 3rd centuries. Their texts were ordered burned. Their communities were scattered. Their teachers were killed. The Great Library of Alexandria, which housed one of the most extraordinary collections of wisdom texts in the ancient world, was destroyed multiple times by multiple empires, as if something in the accumulated power structure of civilization kept recognizing it as a threat. The mystery schools of Greece, the Eleusinian mysteries, the Pythagorean brotherhoods, the Orphic traditions were gradually suppressed as Rome consolidated political and religious power. The Cathar communities of southern France, who preserved a form of direct experiential Christianity that emphasized inner gnosis over institutional authority, were massacred in the Albigensian Crusade of the 13th century. Entire villages, entire lineages erased. The indigenous wisdom traditions of every continent, the shamanic lineages, the ancestral cosmologies, the living relationships with the natural and spiritual dimensions of reality, were systematically destroyed by colonialism, forced conversion, and the deliberate elimination of languages, practices, and knowledge holders. Again and again, across centuries, across cultures, across continents, the same pattern. The knowledge arises, the knowledge spreads, the knowledge is suppressed, and yet here we are, because knowledge of this kind cannot ultimately be destroyed. It does not live in books, it does not live in buildings, it does not live in institutions, it lives in consciousness itself. And consciousness, the real thing, the ground of all experience, the awareness that you are, cannot be burned, cannot be imprisoned, cannot be erased. It is prior to all of that. It is what is aware of all of that. And because it cannot be destroyed, it cannot be permanently suppressed. It keeps finding its way back through the mystics, through the poets, through the scientists who push past the consensus and ask the questions that don't fit the prevailing framework, through the ordinary people who wake up one morning with the undeniable sense that there is something more, something beneath the surface of ordinary life that they haven't yet touched but can somehow feel is there, through you, somewhere inside you. Before you ever found this video, before you ever came across these ideas, you already knew something was missing. That feeling, that quiet, persistent, sometimes urgent sense that the world as it is presented doesn't account for everything, that there is a depth to existence that ordinary life doesn't reach, that you are more than you have been told you are. That feeling is not delusion, it is not wishful thinking. That feeling is the divine spark recognizing itself. That is your true nature, the infinite awareness that you actually are, pressing up through the layers of conditioning and forgetting, trying to remind you of what you already know. That is the invitation. Before we close, I want to give you something you can actually use. Not a concept to think about, not a belief to adopt. A practice. A practice used by the ancient mystery schools, by the initiates of every tradition we have discussed tonight, that is deceptively simple and profoundly effective. It is called the witness practice. Find a quiet place. It does not need to be special. Your bedroom, your living room, anywhere you will not be interrupted. Sit comfortably. You do not need to sit in any particular position. Just sit in a way that is alert but relaxed. Close your eyes. And now, instead of trying to make your mind quiet, instead of trying to achieve any particular state, instead of trying to do anything at all, simply observe. Watch your thoughts arise. Do not try to stop them. Do not try to change them. Do not follow them into their stories. Simply watch them appear, unfold, and dissolve. As you watch, ask yourself this question. Who is doing the watching? The thought appears, you see it. But you are not the thought. Because if you were the thought, there would be no one to observe it. The observer and the observed are different. The emotion arises, you feel it. But you are not emotion because you are the awareness in which the emotion is arising. The sensation comes and goes, but you, the witness, remain in that gap, in that silent, spacious, effortless awareness between the thoughts, between the words, between the moments of experience. That is where you will find what we have been pointing at all evening, not a concept, not an idea, not a belief. A direct encounter with what you actually are. Do this for 10 minutes every night before you sleep. Just 10 minutes, sitting, watching, asking who is watching, and pay close attention to what begins to shift. Not dramatically, not all at once, but gradually, unmistakably. The way you relate to your thoughts will change. They will begin to feel less like you and more like weather, arising and passing through a sky that is not disturbed by them. The way you relate to difficult emotions will change. They will begin to feel less like threats and more like information, movements in a field of awareness that is itself untouched. The way you move, through the world will change. There will be a quality of presence, of groundedness, of knowing, beneath the surface of ordinary experience that was always there, but that you were too busy, too distracted, too identified with the costume to notice. Because once you begin to remember what you are, nothing will ever look the same again. If this resonated with you tonight, if something in you recognized what we have been exploring together, then you already know it is true. Not because I said so, not because any tradition says so, because something in you recognized it. Subscribe, because what we are building here is only just beginning. There are layers upon layers still to explore. Ancient texts that have been hidden for centuries, forbidden teachings that were suppressed because they were too liberating, practical methods developed by the mystery schools of Egypt, Greece and India over thousands of years to systematically awaken consciousness in their initiates. We're going to go through all of it together, video by video, layer by layer, until the full picture emerges. Until then, be still, go inward, ask the question, and remember what you are.